Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And today, I want to go beyond that world and into a galaxy far, far away. That's right, I'm going to talk about Star Wars. And yes, I'm aware I may do my comments section to the hottest pits of Mustafar, but my love of Star Wars is stronger than my disdain of trolls. Now, I'm aware that talking about Star Wars is a minefield these days. It was already contentious in the days before the sequel trilogy. I'm old enough to remember the colorful reaction to the prequels, most notably one Jar Jar Binks. I saw those movies in the theaters, and like Obi-Wan sensing the destruction of Alderaan, I could feel the tension. But even that paled in comparison to the more recent upheavals. The sequel trilogy under Disney has been, well, divisive to say the least. I won't get into why, mostly because it brings out the inner Sith Lord in everybody. It isn't just about the fan reaction to The Last Jedi, or how the fandom has conducted itself as a whole. There are many issues that have created the current situation for the franchise, way too many for me to list. Now, I certainly have my opinions of these movies, and I'll boldly say I enjoyed them for the most part. They had their moments, and overall I enjoyed them more than the prequels. That's as much as I'm willing to say right now. But there's one aspect of the sequel trilogies that made them work, at least for me. One detail that reaffirmed my love of Star Wars for all the right reasons. That reason is Rey. Her story, how it started, how it played out, and especially how it ended, that's what made the sequel trilogy work. It's the story I found most compelling when all was said and done. And within that trilogy, it was the rise of Skywalker that made Rey a character worthy of wielding any lightsaber. I don't deny that's a controversial opinion. I'm aware that Rey is one of the most divisive characters to come out of the sequel trilogy, and for somewhat understandable reasons. But I also think the criticisms of her character often overlook the merit of her story, because it's a powerful story, one that brings out the elements that make Star Wars so great. And I say that as someone who didn't really care for Rey at first. When I saw The Force Awakens, she was not the most memorable part of that story. I found myself more intrigued by Finn and Kylo Ren. Even Poe Dameron had his moments. That's not to say I hated Rey, I just wasn't different to her. Like many others, I had my theories about who Rey was and who her parents were. After seeing The Force Awakens, I suspected she might be a Kenobi, perhaps Obi-Wan's granddaughter or niece. When The Last Jedi revealed that her parents were nobodies, I wasn't too upset, but I was disappointed. It didn't ruin the story, but it did make Rey's place in it feel a bit incongruent. Rey being a nobody in this vast, galaxy-wide conflict just didn't fit very well. She just happens to be this nobody who is insanely powerful in the Force. She just happens to get drawn into this ongoing war with the First Order. There's no destiny or personal ties to give greater weight to her struggle. As a story, especially one in the Star Wars universe, it just doesn't work. It's one of those details that feels different for the sake of being different. I didn't expect Rise of Skywalker to fix that. I went into that movie excited to see more Kylo Ren. I wanted to see how his story played out more than Rey's. Then, the movie dropped a bombshell that suddenly put Rey's story into a whole new light. She's Emperor Palpatine's granddaughter. With that one revelation, Rey became a very different character in my eyes. Her role in the sequel trilogy suddenly changes in a very meaningful way. Her being the Emperor's granddaughter, and the bearer of his dark legacy, puts her character into a very different context. It's one of those things that changes the way you see the previous two movies. I won't say it's on par with Darth Vader being Luke Skywalker's father, nothing was ever going to top that. But Rey being Palpatine's granddaughter has a similar impact on both the character and how she's perceived. Suddenly, she's not a nobody. She's not just some orphan girl whose parents abandoned her. She carries the heritage of one of the most evil Sith Lords in Star Wars history. In many respects, that's a far greater burden than being the son of Darth Vader. At least with Vader, you could make the case that he wasn't pure evil. I mean, before he became a Sith Lord, he was a Jedi. He was a hero to the Republic. He had the respect and admiration of many. Anyone who has watched the Clone Wars show, and I highly recommend you do if you haven't, knows this part of his history. He started off good, but then he fell to the dark side. With Palpatine, there was no fall. He didn't need one. He was born into the dark side. He was always an evil, power-hungry tyrant. Unlike Darth Vader, there's no path to redemption for this guy. No amount of begging and pleading, even from his own children, would send him back to the light. And Rey has to bear that burden. She has to navigate this fight knowing that her heritage is steeped in darkness. It's a tough burden to bear. She agonizes over it throughout Rise of Skywalker, and it allowed Daisy Ridley to show off her acting prowess, and it was beautiful. Beyond just changing the entire context of Rey's journey, it suddenly fills in the major inconsistencies of her story. All those amazing feats she pulled off in the first two movies, all the skills she demonstrated with so little training, her being a Palpatine suddenly makes sense of all that. These traits that made her seem bland and overpowered suddenly become an ominous sign of the power lurking within her. Now, whenever I rewatch those movies, I see her actions and decisions as carrying more weight. Like Luke idolizing his father in A New Hope, it adds a new dimension to how her story begins and evolves. It also effectively undercuts the common refrain that Rey is a Mary Sue. Now, I never agreed with that criticism. Moreover, I think it's a bullshit label that's thrown around way too much and for all the wrong reasons. That label still clouded her character for most of the trilogy. I'll even admit it clouded my opinion of her to some degree. But Rise of Skywalker shattered that illusion by both giving a valid reason for Rey's vast power and having her endure a full-blown identity crisis. That crisis culminates with her confronting her reborn grandfather. It's a battle that forces her to tap into this vast power that she knows comes from a dark source. She already saw a glimpse of where that power could lead, having seen a Sith version of herself at one point. But both she, with the aid of Kylo Ren, are the only ones capable of stopping Palpatine once and for all. It evokes some eerie yet relevant parallels with Luke's journey. The key difference is that Luke sought to save his father. Rey has to kill her grandfather, and doing so means becoming the very antithesis of him. For her, being a Jedi isn't a destiny. It's a choice, a pursuit, a drive to reject the dark legacy of her heritage. And when she succeeds in the end, it's amazing. I remember cheering her on as I sat in the theater. I wasn't alone either. I suspect more than a few jaded fans were won over by that moment. It also gives meaning to what many see as the most controversial moment in Rise of Skywalker. Namely, the moment where she takes the name Skywalker. I get why some have a problem with that scene. Rey, practically speaking, is not a Skywalker. She has no blood ties to Luke, Leia, or Anakin. But I don't see her taking that name as disrespectful or contrived. More than anything else, I see it as the final act in her charting her own path. She may be Palpatine's granddaughter, but that name and that heritage cannot and should not define her. After all, it was Luke Skywalker who guided her through the side of the light. It was Luke Skywalker who inspired her to embrace the ways of the Jedi. And let's face it, going by Rey Palpatine just wouldn't work in a galaxy once ruled by a tyrannical emperor with that same surname. It carries too much baggage, whereas Skywalker has become more than a name. As The Last Jedi showed, it's part of a larger legend, one that inspires others throughout the galaxy. Being such a powerful Force wielder, and the Last Jedi trained by Luke, she's plenty worthy of carrying that legacy forward. Not everyone will agree with that, and I respect that opinion. But for me, when she identified herself as Rey Skywalker, I couldn't help but smile. That moment solidified Rise of Skywalker as a beautiful end to an amazing saga, one that became more amazing because of Rey. It didn't just save her character, it brought the sequel trilogy in harmony with the most critical themes of its predecessors. Both Rey and Luke undergo journeys driven by destiny and burdened by their heritage. They each face corruption, loss, and failure, but they rise above it, becoming stronger and inspiring hope in others. It's the essence of what makes Star Wars great in the hearts of so many fans, myself included. Now, as I said earlier, I know that Star Wars has a passionate fan base. A good chunk of that fan base likely disagrees with me. Rey is still a divisive character, and again, I understand why. But for me, at least, Rise of Skywalker made her great. And whatever happens with the franchise moving forward, she'll always have a special place in my heart. Thanks for watching, guys. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and may the Force be with you all.